Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Symposium on Walkability as an Alternative for Sustainable Mobility in Cities. I am Pablo Páramo, representing the Doctorate program of Education from Universidad, Pedagógica, Nacional in Colombia, and I'm going to be the chair of this symposium. I just wanted to start saying that it's a shame we can't meet face-to-face due to this pandemic, but it's lovely to see you all virtually, regardless. I also wanted to say, I hope all of your friends and family are okay and healthy during this difficult time. Let's all hope that at the next conference together, we can share public places in wonderful surroundings. So by the introduction of this symposium, there is a global concern to find out alternative forms of mobility to mitigate the effects of climate change in the cities. Exploring alternative means of mobility that includes encouraging the use of public transport with non-polluting energy sources, the use of bicycles and skateboards. However, few efforts are being made to adjust cities to make them walkable. The importance of walking is recognized as a physical activity that contributes to health, as a facilitator of social encounters and recreation, and as a dynamic mechanism of social inclusion. In order to promote walking as an alternative means of mobility, it's essential to adjust the urban design to the necessary conditions so that walking can be a viable option, motivating and exciting for citizens and efficient for mobility. The general objective of this symposium is to discuss walkability as an alternative means of sustainable mobility in the cities, based on some qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method studies that gather the phenomenological, social norms, and cultural experiences in times of the need of energy transitions. Also, on how walkable cities are and the importance of designing with people in mind. The symposium will consist of 5 presentations, namely, walkability in Latin American cities, purposes pursued by its inhabitants and conditions that have made them walkable through time. I'm going to be first. The next one is walkability in Latin American cities, purposes pursued by its inhabitants and conditions that have made them walkable in time, by Miguel Ángel Aguilar from Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana de Iztapalapa, Mexico. Next, we have walkability survey and optimization design research at subway stations and its catchment area in winter cities of China by Yu Du from Harbin Institute of Technology from China. Then, socio-psychological drivers of sustainable travel choices. First results of a multidisciplinary project in the city of Cagliari in Italy by Fernando Fornara from University of Cagliari in Italy. And finally, fostering acceptability of social innovative energy projects, fostering sustainable mobility through superblocks in Spain by Adina Dumitru from Universidad of A Coruña in Spain. Now I have revealed the contents of the symposium. I'm moving on to the presentation of our study in Latin America. Walkability in Latin American cities. Purposes pursued by its inhabitants and conditions that have made them walkable through time. What was the research problem? Let me say this. Urban managers and planners in Latin America have not paid attention to the importance of walking. The mobility of the motor cars and the bicycle have been privileged whilst ignoring pedestrians, let me say. Many social practices have disappeared as a consequence of the lack of spaces for walking and social encounters. The sidewalks are narrow, a few kilometers long, discontinuous, have poor illumination at night, high indices of accidentality for pedestrians, and there is a low perception of safety when people walk in the cities. The impossibility of walking impacts the physical and emotional health of the city's inhabitants. The design conditions of the city are associated with its accidentality indices. Children, people with special needs, and elderly people are especially excluded from this experience. By preventing walking, the educational function of the city is truncated to learn about its history, the milestones that give its identity, the social diversity that characterizes it, the possibility of coming into contact with other people, and natural elements. Although there are several works that have explored cities and their walkability in literature, urban anthropology, psychology, and health sciences on urban walking, only a few have addressed this activity in Latin American cities through time. Next, we will explore the rationality behind our study. It's important to mitigate the impact of climate change. Also, recovering good experiences from the past could contribute to the social and place identity. Walking is a rich experience and it's important to integrate people into this culture and to appropriate the city for them. Also, discovering the history of streets and plazas and its contained social practices can give us some ideas about how to recover some of them. Next, recovering walkability of the cities contributes to mitigate the impact of climate change. The 22nd World Conference on Walkability took place in Bogota, and the research was part of this important event. And finally, this leads nicely onto the research question, which was, what conditions contribute to make a city walkable, and how has the walking experience evolved during the last few centuries in Latin American cities? As a secondary question, we have, how has the walking experience evolved during the last few centuries? What physical and social conditions facilitate the walkability of the city? What purposes do people have when they walk? And what recommendation could this research provide to urban managers for the development of walkable cities? It's important that we now look at the purpose of the study. This was to explore how the experience of walking has changed in the last century in Latin American cities, and to identify the perceptions of physical and social conditions that facilitate or inhibit this experience. I will now present the methods we use in this study. First, we did a systematic review of studies that explore the benefits of walking. Also, a literature review on how people use public spaces in the past and what was the importance of walking for socializing. We completed a descriptive study, a compilation study that compares 6 databases corresponding to data taken from a questionnaire with participants from the 6 cities involved in the study. 1,832 people from 5 Latin American countries and 6 cities, México, Ciudad de México, Guadalajara, Bogotá, Montevideo, Arequipa, y Buenos Aires, participated in this study. We use a stratified sample according to 4 groups of age and location in the cities. Results from the literature review. This is the part of the presentation you will all be waiting for, our results. From the Systematic review based on Scopus, Google Academic, Redalyc, Cielo, Dialnet, and Cyber, a total of 140 documents reveals that the majority are articles, 87%, just 2.9 books and 1.4% chapters. The topics are associated with urbanism, education, and health. The studies emphasize the physical and psychological benefits when walking and the phenomenological experience of being in the world. The accessibility of natural environments like parks when walking from different points of the city is essential. Walking for health, preventing obesity and heart problems is important, obviously. Walking as recreation is highlighted in public policy. Also, we found that urban planning based on walkable cities and the importance of having a walking and cycling infrastructure, the sensorial experience of walking around public spaces. Then, we also found that, that exploring how people interact with the environment is relevant for academics. And when people go out for walking, people's perception of safety increases. Walking interacts with different genders, races, and religions. Attitudes associated with walking are related to the neighborhood. To walk is a social experience. Also, there are barriers to walking, physical and psychological. For instance, perception of insecurity. We also notice in the literature review a high rate of accidentality for pedestrians, the importance of walking for sustainable cities. Alamedas, plazas, main streets, and promenades played an important role to facilitate people's encounters. During the second part of the 20th century, there was a reduction in walking as a social experience. And the 21st century shows an increase in pedestrian activities. As a result of the SSA analysis for the items, it was established that there are three main dimensions of reason that people decide to walk. As you can see in this figure, items were distributed in three areas. This is what the SSA helps to analyze the response to items. People walk for mobility or displacement, for leisure, and for health and well-being. Question number 50 is very interesting. We ask for the general assessment of walkability of every city. As you can see in this figure, there is not a big difference between them. And also you see that citizens consider their cities are moderately walkable, considering the scale from 1 to 7, as you can see. The main heading of the items was how walkable is your city for different reasons we gave in the items. Comparing items, those with the higher mean are related with malls. Sadly, people only consider the city's malls to be walkable. Where safety is concerned, the majority of people only consider malls walkable. Whether they are just walking inside them or using the gyms they have on offer. Those items with the lowest average are related to safety. For example, the city is not walkable when you need to walk through a dark area, a quiet street, or when you need to use a toilet to find a water dispenser. In conclusion, it was possible to identify some key Dimensions to assess the experience of walking around public spaces. The purposes people walk for mobility or displacement, for leisure and health and well-being, and places where they walk, malls, neighborhood, and public places and nature. The study highlights the importance of design in making cities walkable. Insecurity and the weather conditions are the most notorious limitations to walking in the cities. Designing spaces for pedestrians contributes to sustainable cities and helps combat climate change. The walking conditions have changed significantly in the last century, although there is an important interest of recovering this social practice in many Latin American cities. There were no significant differences among cities in Latin American countries in the general assessment of how walkable they are. And last but certainly not least, the study was a valuable experience to gather groups of researchers from around the region with the same interests. So this concludes my presentation. And now let's move to the next presentation with Miguel Ángel Aguilar. Thank you so much for your attention.
Hello, this morning I'm Miguel Ángel Aguilar, and I'm going to present the paper, the research, Walkability as Historical, Phenomenological, and Social Experience, Approaches from Latin American Cities. Okay, so, well, the aim of this research is to explore different trends on the experience of walking in 8 Latin American cities from the point of view of its citizens. This presentation is part of the project Walkability in Latin American Cities and is made in collaboration with Pablo Páramo. Well, walking is an important pillar of the life in urban areas. While walking, we enter in contact with places and people in public places. We share and form a common knowledge about the meaning of places and patterns of interaction. So, the city turns into a meaningful location. The goals of the research are understand the importance of the practice of walking, taking into account different social dimensions, the purpose of walking, how the places are constructed and evaluated through walking, the importance of corporality and phenomenological experience that arises in pedestrian moving, and also locate the main trends in the discourses about walking in the city. The theory background is composed by appreciations about walking and interactions, walking and sociability, walking and the quality of the built environment, and also to be aware that to walk means to move with the body. So new sensations arise and allows to be in contact with reflections and sense of the self. The methodology for the research were interviews that were made in 8 Latin American cities that you can see in the slide. A total of 9 interviews were made, though they vary in quality and extension. The questions that we asked were about how and where do the people walk, what happens while walking, and environmental preferences, and also about past experiences. Okay, what we found were different trends. First of all, about the purpose of walking, we have to say that there are 2 main and distinctive ways of walking. First of all, instrumental, that it means going to work, school, or doing errands, and in the second place, recreational purpose, to stroll, exercise, or socialize. However, they can be interwoven, so there is a pleasure observing people or places while going to work or to school. Also, walking dogs or going out to take photographs or just to think. So also we found these interstitial practices. We have to say also that walking is deeply interwoven with the social timing and spacing of activities. As such, people walk within the social structuring of the city. While we asked these questions about walking, we found that there is a very distinctive difference between walking and mobility. Ask about walking means thinking about the pleasure of it, while if we asked about mobility, people emphasize more in the effort and in the hardness of moving around in the city. About places and social spatial conditions, we found this very interesting for me, that the idea of the path prevails over places, showing that for interviewees, it's more important to be on the move than to be in one particular place. So walking means moving, and moving through paths. And also, there are usual paths that are highly valued because of their site. Heritage areas are very important because of the contact with history, and also for some people, there's also very important to be in contact with nature. At the same time, two important features define which path to follow. The avoidance of obstacles, cars, threatening driving, garbage, street vendors is important, and also the personal safety. The obstacles are really important. Here we see in Mexico City different kinds of paths and the obstacles that can be found while the people walk. A young woman from Guadalajara, Mexico, told us very impressive things like, I always look for the possibility of going out with somebody else. I'm afraid while I walk, I think hopefully I won't be kidnapped. In my experience, the problem is not the city or its infrastructure or the spaces, but insecurity of the country where I live. So here the walking gets interwoven with the insecurity atmosphere in the city. About walking experience and corporality, we can say that the senses play a central role in the richness of the walking experience. In the interviews, smell, hearing, viewing, or even taste are highly mentioned. Also, the senses are linked with movement. Going slowly in the street means the chance to be aware of the surroundings. Moving fast is to be conscious of the body's stress and its sensations. The city center is highly attached to a sensual stimulation that refers to a sense of past times. So this emphasizes the importance of the built heritage. And here is where the history and memory meet. A small quote that comes from Mexico City, I guess, said that to walking in the downtown, in the center of the city, is like living in a history book. And so you have to be reading with your feet. And also the senses, the use of the senses mark and constitute or build map of the senses, where you can locate a smell, a sound, a taste in the air, and link it to a path or place. So recognize the pleasant and displeasant stimulus. Through the use of the senses, the pedestrian becomes part of an urban sensible order. In this sense, the people recognize what is its own and what is strange in terms of the senses. And we have to think also that for some researches in the subject of senses, like House and Klassen, the order of the senses is also a social order. So while we move in the city and what we sense our surroundings, it's also framed in a social order. Here we can see some textures, the textures of the stone in the photo at the left, and then at the right, some restaurant of tacos in Mexico City, where you can smell the meat that is placed almost in the street for attracting customers or just for making its presence viewable. Okay, about the phenomenology of walking, we ask ourselves, what's on the mind of somebody that is walking? which is the outcome of the combination of movement, paths, places, and body sensations. Here, the accent is placed in the relation of evocations and discourses, what the people can tell us about what are they thinking or experience while they move in the city, and how do they put this in a discourse that we can analyze. So, an aspect is that remembrance and the connection between past and present is a very common experience while walking. The people ask to themselves what remains and what is lost in the surroundings while they walk. Also, another kind of phenomenology while walking is that we can see that walking of the self and experience autobiography, because the autobiography of the pedestrian is written in the street, in their everyday moves. In Santiago de Chile, a 65 years old woman asked to herself while she's walking, how do I become old so fast? In Bogota, a person complains because the people in the street are enclosed in themselves, so everybody's anonymous. And that gives the sense of solitude. So the micro interactions that occur while walking oscillate between quietness, everything is fine, or unsafety. I'm afraid of what happened to me while I'm walking in the street because of the crime and the possibility of being attacked. Well, here's a sample of a street, central street in Mexico City. Discussion. So, a multiplicity of social acts are embedded in the practice of walking. Local and urban mobility, expression of environmental preference, turned into paths and uses of the places, expression of public sociability, and also the interwoven of personal and urban memories, and also an embodied self on the street. In the post-COVID city that we are approaching to, we will need to stress the importance of walking as a way to encourage urban and street life. Here are some references, and thank you very much. Okay, that's it.
So, hi to all. Do you hear me? I will give this live presentation from my kitchen in Cagliari, Sardinia,
Yes,
Italy.
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Stephanie. I thank Pablo for inviting me to this interesting symposium, and I'm going to share my screen. So, that's it. Okay, let's go. So, I'm going to present this preliminary study that is included in a multidisciplinary project involving basically transport engineers, like, for example, Elena Sottile and Italo Meloni, co-authors of this presentation, and also ICT experts, because the aim is to develop a mobile application that will be used for sending tailored messages on the basis of empirical evidence produced by our studies. And also here, co-authors of this presentation are Salamanca and Oriana Mosca, that are social and environmental psychologists as myself. So, it has been demonstrated, it is widely acknowledged that the transport emissions are a quite serious problem. In fact, nearly 25% of European greenhouse gas emissions are caused by transport. And this is, in general, one of the main causes of urban air pollution. And the number of deaths is increasing decade after decade. Basically, two ways have been proposed for fostering behavioral change in transport actions. That is more structural interventions, like, for example, financial or social incentives, or by providing a more supportive urban planning and design, or persuasive campaigns based on modification of attitudes, beliefs, emotions. A distinction is present between sustainable means of travel. A distinction between more active travel, like walking and cycling, and non-active travel, or less active travel, like, for example, the use of public transport, or the use or purchase of electric vehicles. Of course, given the theme of the symposium, I will focus in this presentation on walking and cycling, that are together, because, as we will see in our questionnaire, the items merge together, walking and cycling action. So we will focus on social norms. We know the difference highlighted by Cialdini and colleagues between the injunctive norm, is the expectancies of others about our behavior in a given context situation, and descriptive norms that have to do with what we see, what we think the others do in a given context or situation. So descriptive norms provide a social cue that indicates what is the appropriate behavior for that situation. And social norms have been used typically also for framing messages in persuasive campaigns. Another important driver of pro-environmental behaviors and also transport sustainable behavior is represented by values. This is the well-known taxonomy by Schwartz, and particularly biospheric values, stemming from more general altruistic values, have been found highly related to pro-environmental behaviors and also sustainable transport behavior. Another focus of our study is represented by motives for using alternatives to private cars alone. And we extracted these motives from the analysis, the content analysis of focus groups with the target population of our study context, that is the metropolitan area of Cagliari. So the motives, in line with the literature, are save time, save money, avoid parking stress, for being more healthy, for being safer, less polluting, and for being a nicer city due to the presence of a lower number of cars. So the objective of the study is to verify the role of this dimension on the intention to use specific sustainable means of transport. In fact, we will see how we distinguish different kind of sustainable means of transport, but in this presentation we will focus on walking and biking. So we expected that the salience of social norms affected significantly the intention to use sustainable means of transport, but in particular we expected that the salience of social norms, injunctive and descriptive norms, working as an amplifier of motivation for using these alternative means of transport. So this is the sample. 272 inhabitants of the metropolitan area of Cagliari, nearly 60, almost 60% are females. So at the beginning, the research design was composed by a 3x2, but unfortunately, I'm not focusing on anticipated motion because this manipulation didn't work. So I will focus on the manipulation of social norms that was done through textual scenarios. So there are three conditions. The condition of the descriptive norm, in which in all the scenarios, there is this protection program for decreasing the use of private cars at the city level. And for the descriptive norm, it was reported that 80% of fellow citizens follow the program, whereas for the injunctive norm, most of your fellow citizens would approve that you join the program. And in the non-norm condition, there is also mentioned the protection program. So about, let's see, just the, okay. About the measures, so behavioral intention, you can see three factors. Intention to use public transport, to buy or suggest ecological means of transport, to walk or use a bicycle. And these three factors emerge from a principal component analysis, and they are reliable enough. So motives for using alternatives to private cars alone, we have one item for each of the motives that we have seen before, except for sit time with 2 items. We also measure values, attitudes towards the use of ecological transport, and concern. The last 2 will be not addressed in this presentation. Okay, this we have the analysis. So the correlation analysis, you find in columns the motives for using sustainable transport in the future and now, and in rows you find different variables, and there is the general intention and then the 3 separated intention, attitude, consent, and value. So it's interesting that the intention to walk and to bike is related to motives like save time and to be in shape, so more healthy reason. Whereas the intention to use the public transport is more related to, again, save money, but also save time. And it's interesting that the intention to purchase or suggest the use of electric vehicles is related to reason, to arguments, more environmentalist arguments like for less pollution, but also for an aesthetic reason, a nicer city, and also with a lower number of cars. And these 2 environmental and aesthetic reasons are the ones that are more related to biospheric values and altruistic values. About the principal, the main effect of norms, we found that only the descriptive norms, the science of descriptive norms makes a difference compared to the non-norm situation. So only the message about the others complying with the environmental program is useful in order to increase the intention to use alternative means of transport, in particularly as you can see on the right, to use the bike or to walk. About the moderation analysis, we can find a similar pattern, for example, about save money. We can find this amplification effect. The red line is the descriptive norm. So you can see that the highest score is when we have a high motivation to save money for using the bike or to walk. This is the focus of this part of my presentation. And the science of the descriptive norm. So you can find the slope is more pronounced that in the injunctive norm situation, whereas the slope is going in the negative direction for as regards the non-norm situation. A similar pattern we found on this other motive for avoiding parking stress. Also in this case, this motivation underline the decision to use, the intention to use the bikes or to walk is amplified by the salience of the descriptive norm and less by the injunctive, whereas is parallel to the x-axis, the non-norms line. A different pattern appears for saving time. In this case, even though also in this case, the highest score is when we have the situation of science of the descriptive norm and high motivation of saving time. In this case, the slope of the line is not different from the one related to non-norms, whereas there is no difference in the situation, in the condition of injunctive norm between persons highly motivated by saving time and persons less motivated by this reason. So to conclude, only descriptive norm has this effect, general main effect, small effect but significant on both overall intention to use alternative sustainable means of transport and specifically on walking and biking. And in particular, it emerged the importance of descriptive norm, confirmed in literature, as a key driver for in particular in this case, as we have seen for walking and bike, and in particular for those who are motivated by saving money and avoiding parking stress. Whereas injunctive norm has less important role, and in particular we have seen also that there is no difference between persons highly or lowly motivated by saving time in this condition. So one of the possible interpretation of these results is, thinking to the fact that this kind of motives like saving money or avoiding parking stress are sort of extrinsic motivation in the terminology of the self-determination theory of Ryan and Dacey. So we should explore more if for pushing effective motivation, social norms can make a difference, whereas for those who are motivated by more intrinsic drivers, probably there is no need to make salient the expectancy of others or particularly what the others do. We are going to also verify the possible multiplication effect of descriptive and injunctive norm in adding some condition to the present experiment, the present study that unfortunately stopped once the COVID-19 constrained us to the lockdown. So thanks for your attention.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending my presentation on fostering acceptability of socially innovative energy transitions, the case of urban reorganization for superblocks. My name is Zadina Dumitru, and I'm an environmental psychologist at the University of A Coruña, where I also lead its Sustainable Specialization Campus, which is a research center of more than 30 groups working on themes of sustainable urbanization, social innovation, and sustainable and healthy lifestyles. I want to thank the symposium organizer and also the Quebec conference organizers for this wonderful event. I will speak to you today about research stemming out of a European project called Smarties, which focuses on socially innovative energy transitions in Europe. Smarties is a 3-year project that involves a consortium of environmental psychologists and agent-based modelers working together to understand the factors that influence acceptability and empowerment in processes in social innovations for energy transitions. And in doing so, they focus their attention on 5 clusters of social innovations. In each of these clusters, we study 2 different reference cases, so cases that have implemented a particular social innovation and that we consider that they have been particularly successful at it. You can see here the cases we focus on and also the topic, the energy-related domain that they focus on. And I will be speaking to you today about mobility in superblocks, which are an urban innovation that helps to reorganize urban space into car-free areas. And these areas are designed to maximize public space and foster social and economic interactions at the street level. We understand social innovation as a change in social relations involving new ways of doing, organizing, framing, and knowing. And this definition was developed in a previous project I was a part of, which was called Transit, Transformative Social Innovation Theory, which had as an objective, as its name says, the development of a theory of social innovation. Also in Transit, and also in Smarties, we want to focus on transformative social innovation, so innovation that leads to more profound changes in dominant institutions. And we understand transformative change as an emergent outcome of different co-evolving and co-evolutionary interactions between the social innovation itself, but also other things that happen and changes that happen in the social context more broadly. In Smarties, we take the perspective that social innovations are locally embedded phenomena, and as such, we adopt a place-oriented and context-dependent perspective in the study of these social innovations. We also consider the processes involved in the trajectories of these projects and initiatives as dynamic and porous and connected to other longer-term changes that take place. And we assume that there is a set of common patterns that can be identified that can support policymakers in fostering acceptability and empowerment in processes of social innovation. Public acceptability has been defined as people's general evaluation of an energy policy or specific energy project. But in social innovations, we think acceptability goes beyond just a positive evaluation to include the adoption of a new normal. So it refers to transformative change, as we mentioned before. And we argue that there are specific dynamics, social dynamics, that can be identified in these trajectories that lead to acceptability and endorsement or adoption rather predictably, or a lack thereof. And one of our main objectives has been to develop such a checklist of key processes and to describe their characteristics and identify key interventions to support policymakers in driving or in fostering successful social innovations. For this presentation, as I was saying, we focused on superblocks. Some of you might be familiar with the concept. They are social innovations that reorganize and reclaim public space for multiple citizen uses. They aim to create convivial places, reshape social relationships in the neighborhood, increase citizen well-being, and foster equal access to urban space by taking traffic out, both public transport and car traffic, and redesigning the inner streets of a neighborhood for alternative social uses, and thus increasing walkability, bicycle use, and other sustainable mobility in the area. And the social innovation here is both the process through which spaces are redesigned, but also the outcomes of changes in social relations that support sustainable mobility, new forms of recreation, and community development through possibilities for joint social activities that were not possible before. We focused on two cases. One is the development of superblocks in the city of Vitoria-Gasteiz in the Basque Country, which is a middle-sized city, and the other is the development of superblocks in the city of Barcelona, a big city, as you all know, of 1.63 million inhabitants. We adopted a methodology of embedded case study design, which allows for the researcher to deal flexibly with the fact that appropriate levels of analysis and unit of analysis might not be evident at the start of the research. So we focus both on the collections of initiatives, but also vectors that are involved in these processes and are connected to each other, sharing a common identity, either formally or informally. Our unit of analysis was both the social innovation itself, so the project, but also the different organizations and individuals involved in it. In the two cases mentioned, we conducted 23 in-depth semi-structured interviews, and this was the structure for all the case studies that explored social dynamics influencing social acceptability of the social innovation. We also looked at motivations for participation, identified instances of psychological empowerment and disempowerment through the process, and instances of positive and negative behavioral spillover when the social innovation was in place. In terms of the interviewees, we focused on key informants, so people that were well informed about the social innovation because they have been involved in it in one capacity or another, and we looked at social innovators, so pioneers, those people that started the project, key supporters, which were different organizations or stakeholders that were very important at the beginning as they endorsed very quickly the social innovation. We also look at beneficiaries or recipients, so those that were affected by the innovation, such as neighborhood associations, and we included critical voices here. And finally, we interviewed experts, people that had either studied or been closely related to the social innovation. One of the key processes that we identified was related to the appearance of resistance and social contestation. All social innovations are characterized by such resistance. And our results show that resistance stems for a fear of change, sometimes related to losing perceived commodities or losing what is assumed as a right, such as the right to drive a car, for example. And our interviewees mentioned that people are often resistant even towards projects that improve their quality of life. Resistance is also a reaction to top-down measures perceived as impositions, which alienated in some cases and produced strong contestations at the beginning. And this is something that the drivers or the promoters of social innovations have had to learn by experience, by trial and error in some cases. A lot of the resistance is also sometimes related or framed in terms of different interests and goals, and a fear that change would bring about negative consequences, such as, for example, less activity for shopkeepers, or the presence of certain residents that are maybe not welcome in the neighborhood, or the increase in tourism, for example, in the case of Barcelona. Another important result had to do with the fact that resistance sometimes stems from social norms that do not support the changes that the social innovation fosters, such as, for example, the social norms that favor the use of the car instead of more sustainable mobility, such as walking or using the bicycle. We identified some of the useful strategies that social innovators have used in these two cases to deal with resistance and contestation. And an important part of this has been renouncing control and learning to act as facilitators instead of as drivers of the process. And they have done this by allowing sufficient time for co-production and the resolution of differences in interests and vision. Sometimes this is not easy from the perspective of policymakers, as they have to go against their planning sometimes in their timeline and allow for uncertainty in how these processes unfold. They also have to overcome fear of conflict and being open to changes in the original project that might have in the end a shape that's very different from what it was at the beginning. And finally, another useful strategy that social innovators have used is in the implementation of pilot projects. And instead of going for the whole vision from the beginning, they have allowed for smaller projects that permit stakeholders to experiment with the new model. For example, by using tactical urbanism approaches that require not such high investments, but allow citizens to experience the benefits of the social innovation firsthand and to see that the drawbacks are not so important. In the previous transit project I mentioned, we've developed a needs-based model of empowerment that was characteristic or was useful for the understanding of how empowerment is fostered in social innovations. And we've also seen that this model was useful in in energy-related social innovations. To foster empowerment, policy makers and social innovators more broadly need to respond to different needs. They can appeal to environmental and social values, and in doing so consistently, they start creating a new understanding of what the social innovation is about. They need to account for experiential needs. So although some of these innovations are driven by sustainability concerns, they also need to take into account the needs for convenience and comfort and other experiences that are important for people in a neighborhood. They also need to support changes in social norms that are barriers to the social innovation. And another very useful element of this model of empowerment is also that they need to foster a new collective identity that provides meaning and slowly builds this perspective and adoption of a new normal. To summarize, meaningful participation in the co-design of projects can be fostered through debates organized at early stages and consultation processes, through long-term participatory involvement in these processes and the creation, for example, of working groups, attention given to resistance and contestation, and a needs-based approach to empowerment. Evaluating social innovation projects is also very important, and feeding this evaluation and to stakeholders and to the public can create acceptability thresholds where a widespread adoption or change in people's mindsets and attitudes can be registered, as it has been in Barcelona and Vitoria-Gasteiz. Superblocks in Vitoria and Barcelona have favored important changes in how people perceive public spaces. Respondents report that now citizens in Barcelona, for example, demand high-quality public spaces and green areas for public use and social interaction instead of more space for car parking, thus attesting to the adoption of a new normal, as was mentioned at the beginning. And in Vitoria, superblocks are now seen as solutions to neighborhood safety concerns and associated to a higher quality of life. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, everyone, for your interventions. for your presentations. Now we open the space for questions from the audience. You have any questions, please use this section of the screen for questions. Let me see.
Hello, I'm Isabel Lema. I'm a co-presenter with Adina Dumitru. Adina apologizes for not being here because she has a medical appointment at this moment, so she's now in the doctor. But I'm taking the lead, and I think I'm answering the question that Annabel Becker has raised. She says that if we can explain how top-down measures are perceived as impositions, if I can define the term. So yeah, in terms of top-down measures, we want superblocks are urban interventions that correspond with political decisions. So there are decisions adopted sometimes by the municipality, and in other occasions they are adopted in a co-production process with citizens. So when superblocks and other urban interventions that change things in a neighborhood, for example, that affect the type of mobility if a resident can enter into the superblock using their car, or they are not allowed, for example. That is a decision that can be adopted just by the city council. In that term, when this top-down decision, citizens resist and also adopt a contestation position. So they maybe organize demonstrations at the street, or they organize political activity on the street against the decision adopted already by the city council. That is the meaning of this imposition concept.
Isabel, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
From where or from whom comes this idea of superblocks? It's quite old, or it's new? Tell me something about this experience in Spain. And this idea has been spread in Spain, or is just in Barcelona?
No, this idea has been adopted by two different cities, as the case study that we presented in Barcelona. That is it's a big city. It's kind of capital of the Catalonia region, but also it has been adopted in Vitoria-Gasteiz, that is the capital of the Basque Country. But also superblocks have been already adopted in the New York City, for example. So this is an idea that started in Barcelona, that they have also been implemented in other cities in Spain. The two of them are, these Barcelona and Vitoria are the most important in terms of the maturity of the experience, but other cities are already starting this transformation. And we think that the COVID-19 situation has enhanced this transformation, this urban transformation towards becoming, towards doing our neighborhoods more walkable, with more public space open to the citizens, and narrowing the use for private cars. So it's very important in terms of the people that are launching these urban interventions, that spread this idea in all the city, not just in different 1, 2, or 3 different neighborhoods. These are pilot strategies, but they have designed a plan for transform both cities in maybe Barcelona, for example, in 500 super blocks. So that is very innovative because it's not just organizing the city center or the ancient part of the city just for tourists or just for walking around and so on. No, just the idea is spread this livelihood atmosphere, this environmental improvement project to the whole city.
Ferdinando, good to see you again. Hope you are
Hi,
okay.
Pablo.
I have a question for you. I'm curious about the experience of Tonucci in his city. I mean, why this experience hasn't moved to other places in Italy? And if social norms are so important, why, I mean, how we can tell people to follow social norms, if that is the key for many things in terms of the environment.
Yes, exactly, Pablo. At the end, yes, the social norms, we know that play an important role, but of course they are not enough, and we need to understand under which conditions social norms work better. Associated which kind of, for example, other pattern expressed by people, but also, of course, expressed by the environment. I can provide a practical example about the target city, the target context that you have seen, that is the city of Cagliari, in which providing a supportive design for walking, for running, and for biking along the sea. There are numbers for which there was an important increase of persons who use the bike, who run, and they use the place that before was just a place for cars, just a roadway, okay? Now, thanks to this transformation, there was, I guess, a sort of a virtual circle for which persons going there and using the place in this new way, and other people seeing this kind of situation in which others are using the place for these motives, follow the norm. And so it is a sort of process. Of course, it's something that, I mean, it's just my supposition, but I mean, there are some proofs about that, for which in the space of 3-4 years, okay, there was this transformation of the place, which transformed also the behavior of many persons. So, of course, we are running this project also to understand, in this case, what works better for moving persons, for shifting from the use of the private car alone. Now there is also the opportunity of purchasing and using electric vehicles. For example, the Italian government is going to giving incentives for this kind of purchase. So we hope that also, thanks to these incentives, the fact that more people now is going to move by, for example, electric scooter, drive other people say, oh, well, it's a nice, good way to move in urban places. So let's go. And I know also in Barcelona, Isabel, recently I was there, I don't know in La Coruña, a similar situation, which in the space of, say, 2 years, I saw before the COVID situation, I saw a lot of persons moving with the electric scooter.
Ferdinando,
Yes.
from Silvia Aricchio,
Yeah.
if descriptive norms
Hi,
are the only key for behavior change, how do we change a behavior if no one is doing it yet? So there is no descriptive norms about that behavior?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, of course. The fact of the descriptive norm, it's not something, you know, there is not a cutoff for which we can decide that there is a number that is enough in order to drive the behavior, okay? But there are some studies demonstrating that also the increasing of the number of persons, also starting from very few, is going to give, of course, a cue, a social cue. And of course, it depends also on who is doing that. Because for, as regards transportation, you know that usually the use of alternative means of transport instead of cars is associated with not having the opportunity to have a car, okay? So it's something that is, say, stigmatized. Social groups who use alternative means of transport are in many cities the ones that cannot allow to have a car. So if you're going to transform this, to shift this kind of belief, for example, there are many examples. I can think to Amsterdam, but also I mentioned before Barcelona, but also in Italy there are cities, and I guess also in Latin America, in which, for example, the use of a bike or for example, of an electric bike or an electric scooter can be also something that, for example, in young people can become a sort of good way, I mean, to travel, and also with this kind of positive association between using this alternative means of transport like an electric scooter and being positive, being good, being appreciated by your social group. I don't know if, I mean, it's important also to make this kind of reflection when talking about social norms.
Thank you.
Who is going to provide the cue? Thanks.
All right. This is a question from Giacomo Balzania. For you, Anne Isabel, are there trends of green gentrification connected with the creation of superblocks and TOD? What are the challenges of integrating walkability principles in the redevelopments of cities from your countries?
Well, I think that you can answer first,
Let
and
me,
also, yeah, and also answer.
Okay, okay.
Can you answer that question?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for the question. I think actually in my country about the TOD, maybe it's difficult to like redevelop it in a short time. Because one reason is that the poverty rise of the land use is difficult to coordinate, and the other reason of that is the institution like to different group to cooperate together to do the redevelopment. So I think these two reasons are the challenges of the integration, the walkability principles.
Okay, Isabel.
Yes, in terms of gentrification, we have observed that both cities, but in specific Barcelona, City Council is very concerned, and also the residents of the different superblocks, they are already concerned and aware of gentrification issues because they were previous experiences in the reurbanization of the city center and different boroughs in Barcelona city center. And because the quality of life increased in a very positive way, also the prices of the houses and living there increases as well. So for the people that are involved now in designing the super blocks, they try to slow or at least control that kind of gentrification, but they are aware that it's very different, but it's very difficult because if you create a very a wonderful space in where children can play on the streets without, for example, car issues, or when you can breathe weather because the quality of the air is better. So many people are willing to live in that place and control the prices, the prices of the houses, of the residences is difficult, but the city council of Barcelona is trying to regulate the prices of the households there. And I like to point about the relevance of social norms, because we did observe in Vitoria-Gasteiz social influence dynamics that foster the sustainable mobility patterns. And I can give you an example. For example, when they start to change the patterns of mobility from car to public transport or cycling, for example, they were a lot of changes, because most of the representatives of the political groups or even journalists started to use the public transport or started to cycle in the city center, and people could see them and they start to do the same. So it was a kind of reputation, and people change, not just young people, but all ages people change their way of behavior just because some relevant people, key persons in the city made that change. So social norms are very important because they can be barriers, but also can be promoters, and we can use it when we do interventions at the city level.
Oh, there is another interesting question for all of us. How do we look upon the balance between planning or design interventions and social interventions, or interventions directed at the individual? Who wants to answer that question? It's a very interesting question about environmental psychologists and urban planning.
Yes, I do not repeat, but my example I provided before about the transformation of the Long Beach of Poeto in Cagliari, I think provides an example in which there was this transformation of the place, but it was combined with a well-done campaign, I think so, in which the two events coming together and together creating this new place because there is a new place in terms of design, but there are new activities. So it's just an example, of course, but it's not easy, and I think this combined way also probably also in the project of Isabel and Dina, something like that work.
Yeah, what we have learned.
Thanks, Maria.
Yes, what we learned from the experience in Barcelona and also in Vitoria is that if you wanna avoid resistance and also social mobilization, social contestation, you have to organize information and communication activities, but not only information activities, but also citizens' participation in decision making. So you have to engage citizens, just not because it's interesting for you in order to avoid contestation, but also because you engage them in a co-production activity, and also the results of that participatory decision making allows you that citizens, residents feel part of the project and appropriate the project. So that's very important in terms of adopting new behaviors. So we are not talking about just an urban intervention. We are talking about changing how people behave. So transform cities in terms of walkability, because we want people to engage in low carbon sustainable mobilities. And so you need a consumption, you need leadership, but also you need that people engage and more or less take the leadership in the designing of the changes in the neighborhood. We are talking about a neighborhood scale, not a wide city scale.
A final question to you. Did you find a connection between insecurity and people resistance to use public transportation in your cities?
Like they don't want to use the transportation? Because,
I mean, in terms of insecurity, are they afraid? I mean, is that variable have any role in the resistance to use the subway stations?
Actually, the insecurity things most happened when the construction period. But when it finished the construction, maybe because our country built the subway station much later than other countries, so we can we know we have much more experience about that. So there is not like the insecurities things like about the construction, but sometimes there is some insecurities things like the social one, like thieves, yeah, something like that. Because like in the winter cities, the subway entrance is much more small and invisible from outside to inside. So sometimes it's not safe for people to go through the entrance.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you all of you guys for this interesting panel. Hope you see you in one of these conferences, maybe later this afternoon or the following days of this week. A big hug from Colombia.
Thanks.
Everybody is all right now.
Thanks, Pablo.
Thank you very
Thanks
much,
to all.
Pablo.
Thanks to all. Hi, Isabel. Nice to see you.
Bye,
Nice
you.
to see you again.
Bye, Isabel. My
I
greetings
hope to see you next time,
Adina.
face to face.
Hope so.
Bye, Ferdinando.
And I told hi Pablo. I had a question for you, but anyway, I will give you this question for another occasion. Anyway, thanks for organizing this symposium, and thanks to all participants too. Bye bye.
Cheers.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.